It was a hot summer night. I knew I wasn't going to get any sleep due to the heat, so I asked a close friend at the time if she wanted to meet up at the beach in the evening. She said yes, and told me she would bring her camera to take photos for her Instagram. I arrived at the meetup point before her, so I looked around and observed the area. Not much stood out, except I noticed two older guys glancing at me every now and then from across the street. I looked back at them a few times to make sure they were aware of them, but in the time I was waiting there, nothing else happened. Soon my friend arrived and I forgot about them. We were about a 30-minute walk from the beach, as we had planned to stop at some of the shops in the artsy little beach town. When we eventually got to the beach, we got some great shots of the sea and each other before the sun started to set. And we got some stellar shots of that too. Then we started asking people if we could take photos of them, and plenty of amazing people agreed. University students doing group yoga on the beach, an elderly couple dancing to music, a mother playing with her baby. It was going perfectly, and the lighting was incredible. After a while, the sun had gone away, and we had taken plenty of pictures for my friend's Instagram. We took an empty back street, as it was the fastest route to get to a cafe I wanted to show her. The back streets were usually safe, but I guess I wasn't used to walking around there at night. At some point, out of the corner of my eye, I saw two men quickly crossing the street. They got in front of us and stopped us, and it was at this moment I realized they were the same men I saw looking at me earlier. My heart jumped. One guy was slightly buff, but the other was quite skinny, both in their mid-30s. Once they were fully blocking our way, they asked us to take photos of them. Alarms started blaring in my head. We were at least 10 minutes from the beach, so they shouldn't have seen us taking photos of other people there. What would make them rush across the street and ask us to do something like that with no context? I felt like screaming no, but my friend, who had never seen these guys before, agreed. It was annoyingly common for her to be like that, super kind and people-pleasing. I just smiled and nodded at the guys. They were eerily emotionless. They kept a deadpan face as they spoke, betraying the fake niceness in their voices. While my friend was taking photos of them doing various poses, I watched awkwardly. They kept looking over at me instead of the camera, never showing a single hint of emotion no matter what position they were in. It was like they were living mannequins. When the mini photo shoot was done, the skinny guy placed his hat on my friend's head. She laughed and thanked him, but it made my stomach churn as I now knew this was going to go further than just photos. Just as I suspected, the men suggested we get drinks together, still not smiling in the slightest. I elbowed my friend to tell her we should get out of this, but she ignored me. Instead, she actually cheered and said she was really thirsty, giving these robotic men her most enthusiastic excitement. It was so insane that I felt dizzy, even though I had told her the cafe we were headed to was open. The men lied and claimed that it was too late, so only bars would be open. This was when I finally butted in and said we were too young to drink, which was true. The buff guy just laughed and said it didn't matter because he would buy drinks for us, but I couldn't even think of a response to that. I just stood there with a look of shock and dread on my face. And that fear, that show of helplessness, was what finally made their facade start to crack. A smirk spread across the thinner man's face, sending shivers down my spine. I grabbed my friend by the wrist and started begging her to leave, whispering that this all just felt wrong. My friend and I had a sidebar conversation at that moment, and while she was stupidly saying it would be fine, the two men kept trying to convince us to go. They even started to move closer to us, and then one of them gripped my shoulder, silencing me mid-sentence. I turned my head in horror and saw the most gut-wrenching sight of my life. The buff man had grabbed a hold of me, and in his other hand, hidden at his waist, was a knife. My instincts took over. I still had my friend by the wrist, so I just bolted. I felt the man's grip on my shoulder tighten, almost hard enough to hold me back, but I barely managed to slip away. I hadn't screamed or anything. I just grabbed my friend and ran. Then I didn't stop until I dragged her into a more populated area. I think if I had wasted the breath, we wouldn't have gotten away. but this left my airheaded friend confused and pissed at me. She just couldn't get it through her head that those guys were bad news. Even as we were getting into a cab, so we didn't have to leave on foot, I pointed the men out to her. They were still watching us from across the street, just like they were from the start, and probably had been all evening. I could still see the glint of metal in the larger man's hand, but my friend refused to believe he was holding a weapon, claiming it was probably just his phone. This story was what made me stop talking to that friend. She thought I was over-exaggerating and said I was being annoying by mentioning it so much. I might have saved her life, and she can't even say thanks. To think she's out there, navigating the world on her own. It's a wonder how she's still alive. This story happened when I was living in Boston. I was 24 and had recently moved there to live with my best friend. I got a job at a massage envy in Back Bay to cover bills. At the time this happened, I had only been working there for a month. Since I was new, I often had to work the closing shift. One night after closing the shop around 9:45 p.m., I said goodbye to my coworker and started walking to the bus stop a couple blocks over. Walking alone had never been a problem until that night. There were a few other people out walking, but other than that, the square was dark and quiet. Then, I noticed a man walking a short distance behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it, assuming he was just going the same direction as me. After a block, though, he caught up and started to walk right next to me, as if we were together and heading to the same place. My heart began to beat faster as my full attention was drawn to him, trying to figure out what the hell he was up to. He was a tall white man, wearing a long brown pea coat and gloves. He had a briefcase with him. Nothing about his appearance was all that creepy, but the look on his face was deeply unsettling. For reference, I'm a short African-American female, so I had reason to be afraid he might want to do something to me, and had the physical ability to do it. The longer we walked, the more nervous I got. I was alone. It was dark, and there was no one else around. On top of that, there really weren't any places open to duck into. But I could see the bus stop ahead. It was empty. And even though the buses ran regularly, there was no guarantee how long the bus would take. I dreaded the thought of waiting there alone with him. He was still walking next to me while all of this went through my head, frantically trying to think of what to do. My thoughts were interrupted when he asked, "Are you from here?" I said I was, but he replied so quickly it was like he knew I was lying. "I have drinks in a hotel room," he said. "I'd love you to come back with me." I declined trying to be polite, but my hands were already shaking in my pockets. As we kept walking, the man was insistent that I go with him, and that it would be a fun time. I didn't want to get forceful with him because I didn't know how he'd react. At last I saw a CVS just up ahead. I mumbled something about having to go and ran into the store, not knowing if he'd follow me, but needing someone, anyone else to be around. Once in the store, I called my best guy friend. He didn't even live in the city, but I was so scared by this point I couldn't think clearly enough to call the cops or tell the store clerk what was going on. He stayed on the phone with me while I pretended to browse the aisles. For a moment it seemed like the man had lost track of me. But then, as I was turning to go down an aisle, I suddenly came face to face with him. We both stopped and looked at each other, a sinister grin now on his face as I freaked out internally. Still on the phone with my guy friend, I started to make things up about how I would be home and ready to eat dinner soon. I was banking on the hope that if the man heard someone was waiting for me, he would know it would set alarm bells off if I didn't show up. It seemed to work for the moment, as the man walked past me and I continued down the aisle in the opposite direction. I went to wait by the entrance, staring out the window at the bus stop. The CVS was closing in 20 minutes, so if it didn't show up soon, I'd have to go out there and wait by myself. Thankfully, the bus came just a few minutes later. I didn't even look behind me and raced onto the bus. Once I sat down, I looked to the door and tried to force it closed with my mind. But then, my stomach dropped as the man walked in at the last second. I froze in terror, watching him walk closer and closer, then sit down in the seat right next to me. The bus drove off, and the next few minutes were the longest of my life. Nothing happened at first, just agonizing stillness. But then I felt him place his hand on my knee. I wanted to cry and scream and take his hand away, but I didn't know what he would do if I did. I just sat there and tried not to lose it. When my stop came up, I pulled the cord and the driver pulled over. The man got out of the seat and motioned for me to walk ahead of him. My whole body was shaking. I didn't know what to do. So I got up and tried to be calm, hoping I could ask the driver to help me. I took 3 steps forward. Then I heard a man call out from behind me saying, "Hey buddy, let me talk to you." I looked over my shoulder, and someone I hadn't even seen sitting in the back of the bus had gotten up and stopped the man by grabbing his shoulder. I didn't have time to think. I took the opportunity to get off the bus. Then I ran into my apartment building. I told my friend about what happened immediately. We were both creeped out by it, and I had a horrible time sleeping that night. I couldn't stop thinking about what that man really wanted to do to me if I actually ended up in his hotel room. I'm glad that CVS was open, and I'm even more thankful to the random stranger who saw what was going on and calmly gave me the out that I needed. If not for them, I don't know how that night would have ended. This happened very recently in June of 2025. I was, and still am, 16 years old. I was on a trip with my mom and her boyfriend to his home country. I won't say where exactly, as I don't want people to think I'm stereotyping the people that live there when I talk about what happened to me. On the day this happened, I was wearing a long skirt, long tankini-style top, even though I don't usually dress like that. I did so because I thought I was supposed to when traveling to different countries. But everyone else? Tourists wore thongs, crop tops, bikinis, and everything. Ironically, even though I was the one most covered up, I was the one who got harassed and catcalled everywhere. No one else seemed to be having a problem, and it slowly started to set in that it was probably because they were all adults and I was not. That day, we had gone out to the pool. We didn't stay long. I didn't even get in the water. I was covered up too. Dry clothes, nothing suggested. When we were done, we started heading back up to the hotel room. I thought my mom and her boyfriend would be with me all the way there, but they stopped at reception to ask a bunch of questions. I was uncomfortable and needed to use the bathroom, so I went into the elevator by myself. I reached the door to my room and tried to open it, but the handle was hard. I tried harder, 2 more times, but to no avail. My mom's boyfriend had been opening the door, so I didn't realize it was so sticky. Then, I stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure of what to do. That's when the man came out, emerging from a nearby room to join me in the otherwise empty hallway. I turned away from him immediately, not making eye contact, facing my door. He walked past me, despite the fact the elevator was in the other direction. I watched out of the corner of my eye as he looked at me, scanning me up and down, then said something in another language, hesitating at first. I turned and asked him to repeat what he said. He looked me straight in the face and said, in English, in this slow, deep whisper, "You're so beautiful, for real." It wasn't flirty. It wasn't kind. It was intense, like someone amazed by an object they want to take. I said thank you, because in that moment, I still thought maybe people here were just friendly. That's what everyone kept saying. The man then asked if I wanted help opening my door. I wanted to believe he was trying to help me, but something was telling me not to let him. I said no, I can get it myself, but then he just stood there, staring at me with a creepy smile on his face. I didn't want him to follow me into the room, so I walked away, not toward the elevator, as I didn't want him to follow me in there either. Instead, I went toward the window at the end of the corridor where he had come from. I stood there, looking down at my phone, pretending to be texting a serious conversation. Then I heard footsteps again as he walked past a second time. He went into his room and quickly came out with someone else, another man. Both walked right past me, and then they stopped just past my room, lingering, waiting. If I wanted to go into my room, I would have had to mess with my sticky door just feet away from them. if I went through the door into the stairwell to try and get away from them, I knew they would just rush over and follow me. Then they'd corner me in a concrete cage with no windows, where few people bothered to go. They weren't that far away. They could easily do it. I was frozen there for what felt like an eternity. Then, without either of them saying anything, one of them walked out of the corridor, then turned toward the elevator. I heard it chime a moment later, as I was wondering what he was up to. Were they giving up? Surely not, because the first guy was still camping by my door. Suddenly, it hit me. He was just going to go down a floor so he could come up through the stairwell. As soon as I realized this, the man by the door started walking, not to the elevator, but to me. I panicked, knowing if I didn't get out as fast as possible, I would get trapped between the two of them. I turned around and went down the stairwell, leaping down 2 steps at a time. I went down to the halfway landing, then hit the turn just as one of them came bursting in through the upper floor. Not even a millisecond after I passed the door on the lowest floor, it opened, and I saw 2 hands reaching out to grab me. They missed by a hair. Then a moment later, the 2 men ran into each other, giving me the space I needed to get away from them. I made it to the ground floor, where my parents were still at reception. I frantically told her what happened, then pointed at the stairwell door, and the 2 men came out at that moment. My mother was about to go yell at them, but her boyfriend held her back and said that wasn't a good idea. This made me pissed at him, as he was basically admitting that all that talk about how everyone was just being friendly was bullshit. Sure, most people were just nice, but that meant some could use that expectation as cover. I never left the hotel room after that. I stayed in the safety of being behind the dead-bolted door. Even then, I kept getting the feeling that someone was waiting for me just outside. But every time I went to look through the peephole, it was like they could hear me coming and walked away. This trip has all but ruined the idea of traveling for me, especially as a young girl. I'll never trust what anyone says about how safe a place is, and they can look me in the eye and lie.